A very good morning to you. I'm Howard Feldman. This is the Sunday Synthesis podcast with me, Howard Feldman. You know, we've been doing this now for 6 months, in fact, just over 6 months, every Sunday without a break. And we always think that we're going to get to a stage where we won't have many questions from you, from our viewers, but each Sunday you send us the most challenging and the most interesting of questions. In the last week, we also had the opportunity to chat to Dr. Brian Abel. He's an immunologist living in San Francisco, and we took a detailed journey into where we are with regard to the vaccine. A lot of it I didn't understand. I know a lot of it you guys didn't understand. So I've asked Anton during the course of this morning to also have a look at that podcast. Well, in fact, he was very involved in it. He recorded it with us, but maybe to give us a layperson summary around that. To begin, as we always do, Dr. Anton Meyberg, good morning. How are we doing this August the 30th?
Good morning, everybody. There are currently 25,187,544 cases worldwide, with 847,039 deaths, and 17 million cases resolved. The United States is up to 6.13 million cases and stabilizing a death rate of about 186,000. South Africa is sitting at 622,551 cases with 13,981 deaths, and there were 2,418 new cases in the last 24 hours. We are now sixth position in the world odometer, and we are trailing just above Colombia and Mexico. I think it's the first time we want to be lower than other countries in these statistical type of workups. There are currently 2,969 patients admitted in Gauteng. That number has gone down dramatically. Last week we were over 4,000, with 411 in ICU and 191 ventilated. So as you can see, the numbers are down dramatically, and there's a big shift downwards at the moment.
Mm. At the peak, the hospital that you were working at had how many COVID wards and how many ICUs operating for COVID?
So at the peak, we had about 6 normal wards with 2 ICU wards and 1 high care ward and 1 PUR ward. At the moment, we are down to 2 ICU wards, 1 PUR ward, and 1 COVID ward.
Wow. So it is a dramatic difference.
Dramatic. Very refreshing.
It is very refreshing, and especially you're on call this weekend, so that makes it even better. Are you concerned that given the opening up of facilities, sports, even in a limited way, that we're going to see a full surge or a mini surge again?
The concern is definitely there. We're very worried about the fact that we are going to see a second surge because people become relaxed, people become sort of, well, you know what, we've beaten this. And we've by no means beaten this virus. If you look anywhere in the world, if you look at Spain, if you look at anywhere in Europe, if you look at United States, if you look at Israel, they all thought they'd beaten this virus, and then they got their second surge. So we've got to maintain our non-pharmacological measures, which are the mask wearing, social distancing, washing of the hands, all those procedures in order to protect ourselves. We've got to make sure we don't overpopulate ourselves with people at this point in time. We don't have too many social arrangements. And if we do, we've got to do them within the parameters and the boundaries that have been set up for us.
Okay, before we get to the specific questions, and we have many, would you give us spend a few moments talking about the vaccine, following the information and following the podcast that we shared last week?
So in a nutshell, just to summarize it, because it was a very detailed podcast and there were a lot of medical sort of analogies in there which were very difficult to understand. Basically, what we are saying is that we are now in phase 3 trials for the vaccine. That means that they are testing the vaccine on about 30,000 people. This is very different to Sputnik 5, which is the Russian vaccine, where they have kind of bypassed this phase 3 trial and are going to be putting the vaccine out there, which is a very unsafe mechanism.
Can I just stop you for a second? Yeah. Did you just make that up, or is it really called Sputnik 5?
It's really called Sputnik 5.
So
it's quite a disastrous name if you consider that Sputnik 5 wasn't the greatest space expedition either.
Well, this is what I'm wondering. I mean, maybe they could have come up with something different, but that's not really our...
Well, that answers the question, doesn't it?
Perhaps. Yeah.
So there are currently 203 trial vaccines with 26 clinical trials, and 6 of those are in phase 3. And there are 316 overall treatments that have been sort of ratified for COVID-19. We must remember that the polio vaccine took 60 years to be produced. Last week, the World Health Organization came out with a statement that Africa has finally eradicated polio. So that's taken over 100 years to eradicate it. It's a major thing because, I mean, most people don't even know what polio is anymore, thank God. Now, if we remember...
I took a brand with a horse on it.
Certain of our older generation will remember times when they actually used to wear garlic around their necks in order to prevent them from getting polio. And that's a true story. The vaccine for COVID-19, for SARS-CoV-2, the virus genome was sequenced 8 weeks after it was identified. And that's 8 weeks, and you look at 60 years for polio. And that's why we're in such a rapid progression of this virus actually trying to find a vaccine for it and it being produced. The United States have underwritten $10 billion to try and produce a vaccine as quickly as possible, and have started producing vaccine, even if they show it doesn't work yet, in order to meet up with the numbers that are going to be needed. There's a lot of political agendas to all of this. We know that, and it could be with the Trump and Biden and Putin and it's a whole war race, etc. But that's on its own merit. There are currently 2 trials in South Africa. The one is the ChAdOx trial, which is an AstraZeneca trial, which takes a weakened virus, which is not able to replicate from an adenovirus. And the other one is the Novavax, which is a protein subunit vaccine, which has been done with Prof. Shabir Mahdi. So there are 2 vaccines in South Africa being worked out. They're trying them on a number of patients that are immune competent and some that are HIV patients that are on treatment as well. So there are very interesting times ahead. We are looking forward to getting a vaccine. It should be with us in the next 6 to 12 months, dependent on the American elections.
Is it likely, in your view, that we'll actually see a number of different vaccines entering the market? And we might find that, well, South Africa, because of AIDS or TB or HIV, TB, etc., might be more suited towards one vaccine, whereas Europe might be another.
That's actually a great question. I'll tell you why. Because if you look at the flu vaccine, the flu vaccine is modeled on the different types of strains you get from all over the world. So we wait before we get our flu vaccine to see what the strain was in the Northern Hemisphere. And then we sort of derive it and make a derivative of that for the Southern Hemisphere. So it might be sort of changed in a different way in different hemispheres according to the season of the year, etc. But I think we'll know over time. At the moment, though, as you say, there's 6 in clinical phase 3 trials that are being worked up at the moment that we're hoping to come out soon. And it's a big competition for these companies because winner will take it all.
What is your view on people participating in these vaccine trials? If one of your patients came to you, what would your feeling be?
There are mixed feelings, I must say. If one of my patients came to you, there was a healthy person that had no comorbidities, I'd say go ahead with it. If you've got comorbidities and you've got other things, we don't know that if you have been given this vaccine and you've got comorbidities, you might make an abnormal immune response to it in the future. So we don't know yet. So rather, if you're going to go try the vaccine, make sure you're a healthy person with no comorbidities. I'm very prone to trying it. I think we need to do it. I think it's very important.
And just to reiterate, baldness, in your view, is still a comorbidity.
Yes, very, very much so. I don't think you've got many T-cell receptors. In fact, bringing that up, and this is a kudos to the woman. Women's bodies produce a stronger immune response to the SARS-CoV-2 virus than men's bodies because they are mounting a more robust T-cell activation response to this virus. That's quite interesting. So I guess that the lack of hair there shows that just shows that you're not robust.
Right, indeed. All right, and whilst we're speaking about that, there's also a lot of talk around the antibody testing that's being rolled out quite extensively across Johannesburg. Certainly, would you know that I guess there's no harm in anybody participating.
Well, it's also a very good question, and I'll tell you why. Because if you ask me, am I going to get my antibodies tested? The answer is no. And why is the answer no? Because it gives you a false sense of security. Okay, so I'm going to get my antibodies tested and the antibody comes back as positive, let's say, please God, we would hope. Okay, even though I've had no symptoms, I would have been completely asymptomatic, but I have been exposed to this virus for the last 6 months. Okay, but in your mind and as a human being, you then start relaxing and thinking, well, I've got the antibodies. Okay, so I don't have to wear my mask here and I don't have to do this here. And we just don't know what human nature is. So just be very careful if you're going to do the antibodies. Once again, it's not immune passport to say you can just go out there, because even if you've had the virus, and yes, you may have antibodies to it, you can still pass on other aspects of the virus to other people. So it may not affect you, but it still can affect other people. So we would like to know we've got antibodies. I think it would be amazing to know that. We don't know how long the antibodies last. We do know that antibodies wane within 2 to 3 months, that is, they decrease in their functioning. And it's not checking your T cell response, which we've discussed before. The T cells, your natural killer cells, a different type of immunity with your adaptive and immunity or your naive immunity. So you've got to be very careful. Saying that once you've had antibodies doesn't mean you can just go out there and have parties and socialize and take things. It's very important, though, for surveillance monitoring, and that you're doing in old age homes and that type of thing. And in somebody who you've had a patient, let's say, that you've tested as negative, but clinically every other sign has been positive, then 3 to 4 weeks down the line, if you do antibodies and they come back positive, at least you know you're on the right track and what you're dealing with.
And earlier this week, we also chatted to you on my show to talk about the fact that we are now starting to see documented cases of reinfection. Can you please take us, anybody who might have missed that slot, please take us through that again, because I think that's extremely important.
So the first documented case was in Hong Kong of a patient that 5 months previous to that was diagnosed positive. They had his actual SARS-CoV virus in the lab. They did a genomic sequencing of the virus and they found out exactly which virus it was. Then the patient got better, and after a few months he went overseas to Spain and he came back and he got sick again. They retested him and they found it was once again SARS-CoV-2, but it was a different strain of the virus. It wasn't a mutation, but it was a different strain having been in another country. So he actually was reinfected with a new type of SARS-CoV virus too. And it does show that you can be reinfected, albeit we're hoping that the second infection will be much lighter, because hopefully you've got this T cell immunity and antibody type of memory cells that your body can fight this off a bit better. There's also been a number of cases in the Netherlands where this has been reported, about 4 or 5 cases. So we're going to start seeing it come up more. It's not a cause for alarm, as I've said before, but it is something to think about and something just to keep at the back of your mind, that if you had the infection, you can get it again.
And just going back, Vivian wants to know, what are your thoughts on a headline that she saw saying, and of course always worry about the headlines because they are designed to make you read further, clickbait, but I don't know if this is right or not. She says there was a headline that said children are silent spreaders of COVID-19. Your thoughts on that? Because of course
it's not something we haven't said before. Yeah. We know that children can spread it. They would be asymptomatic and mild, and that's why at stages we have closed schools down and we've done certain restrictions on them so we can make sure when there's a surge that no one's exposed. And that's why at schools children are kept in their bubbles. They've still got to wear masks, they've still got to wear visors, etc. if they are at high risk, etc. Most children just have to wear their masks. They've got to keep social distancing. They've got to social distance at break. In fact, an article came out in the last week from the World Health Organization that children under the age of 5 don't have to wear masks. Now, I'm not so happy with that statement, because the benefits of wearing masks should be weighed against the potential harm associated with wearing masks, including the feasibility and the discomfort. And most of our kids at the age of 5 are happy to wear masks. They're managing to wear masks. It's safer for them to wear masks. Obviously, kids under the age of 3, higher choking risk, different story. Rather put them in visors. It's preferable. But kids at the age of 5 should be wearing masks. As far as we're concerned, it's just better because there's a lot of sort of home transfer. If you've got an 11-year-old brother who's at school and you're at school as a 5-year-old, we don't know what's transmitting between you. So rather be safe.
So would you agree with the following? 0 to 3, nothing. You don't wear anything.
0 to 3, you do not need a mask. Yeah.
3 to 5, try wear a visor.
It's preferable to wear a visor at 3 to 5. If they can wear a mask, great. It's far better than wearing a visor. The visors aren't 100% safer, but there's different types of visors. You can get hoodie visors, which come over their head as a cap type thing, much easier. Remember, you've got to protect everybody, and it's about protection of people. It's not only about the fact that you want people to be comfortable.
What's so interesting is the kids get used to these things, so even young
Very
kids look
quickly.
around and I was looking at a little kid yesterday and a 2-year-old looking at everybody, no comment about the fact that everybody was walking around with masks. This has just become, for them, it's not the new normal, it is normal. So
It is normal.
actually,
It's a
for the kids,
reality.
it might be easier
Yeah.
to adapt towards
You can
this.
train your kids to wear
Mm.
masks, and they have been wearing masks anyway up to this time. So I don't think we should change it.
Yeah, yeah, interesting indeed. Carla wants to know, do we have tocilizumab available, and is it being used successfully?
So we do have tocilizumab available. It's called tosylisimap, and it's a monoclonal antibody. It's used against something called interleukin-6, and that's found in your hyperinflammatory response or your cytokine response. We do use it sort of as a last-ditch effort if we basically see that the patient is in extreme trouble, if they need to be ventilated, if they've got a high, what we call CRP, a high D-dimer, a high ferritin, if they've got a high interleukin-6 level. We're using that together with corticosteroids such as dexamethasone or other corticosteroids, together with oxygen, together with anticoagulation, and together with remdesivir. So it is part of our armamentarium of treatment that we are using, and it's a very effective drug, but it's got major side effects as well.
Shirley wants to know if one does a test, and she says she writes from Israel, so she's talking about the regulations there. She says if one does a test about a week after being exposed to a COVID carrier and the result is negative, why does one still have to stay in isolation for the full 14 days?
Because albeit that you could be asymptomatic, you could still produce or shed virus at a later stage, and it's just far safer to keep in quarantine for that period of time to make sure you cannot pass virus on to anybody else.
Okay, and Peter wants to know, is the state fudging the numbers? Reported today that COVID-19 recovery is 86%. That might mean anything. Do 14% die? We know that that's not correct. What are the real risks of death if one contracts COVID-19?
So 86% recovery means that 86% of the population who have got the virus have recovered. The truth of the matter is, how do they actually work that out? I don't know. I mean, who knows? It could be a political, it could be epidemiological. There's a whole way that they are working these numbers out. But it doesn't mean that then 14% of people have died. It means that the 14% of cases are still active. Some are in hospital, some are not in hospital. What is the second part of the question?
What are the real risks of death?
Well, we've said before, there's 5% become critical that land up in ICU, and those 5% are the ones that are trouble of dying. And it could be for a number of reasons. It could be from multi-organ failure, it could be from brainstem involvement, it could be from cardiac involvement and respiratory involvement. So there's multiple reasons why they do die in ICU and from this disease.
Mandy says schools are back, places of worship are back, and there are prayer services happening in homes. People are sharing meals. They are walking around with no masks. The other day I was walking out of a store when a lady not wearing a mask was walking towards the entrance of that shop. The man at the door said, "Where is your mask?" And she replies, "It's in the car. I just want to get one thing. I'll be quick." She wasn't allowed into the store, but surely if this is the behavior, we can expect another wave.
Well, that's completely correct. I mean, we've still got to maintain all the requirements that we've had for the last few weeks, few months, because if we don't do this, then we are going to have a major surge. I think what's important to know is if everybody could just look around them and see how relaxed we are at the moment, how many weeks down we are, that from where we were to where we are now, we want this to continue. We want to be able to say that on Rosh Hashanah, first night, please God, that we can actually sit with part of our family and sit and have a meal with them. If we carry on in this vein, the answer is definitively yes. But if we get a second surge in the next 2 weeks, then we're not going to be able to go to shul. We're not going to be able to have meals with part of our family. We're not going to be able to interact. And we're going to be cutting our nose to spite our faces. And so we've got to be careful. We have to be careful.
All right. And Karen says, if I've had swine flu really badly, is there any way that I could have built up some immunity to COVID?
So it's unlikely because they're two different viruses. There is a theory that says that if you have different types of vaccines throughout your life, you do build a better immune response. Now, you've trained your immunity and your immune response to react to different viruses. So that's a potential. But H1N1 or any of the other types of avian influenzas or the H1 influenzas, those are not going to protect you per se from this coronavirus.
Let's just talk about a few people asking about, and this is specifically for our Jewish viewers, but it applies to everybody. It is the Jewish festivals coming up. It's quite an emotive time. People would like to be back at synagogues, but again, as I say, that applies to churches, mosques, etc. Zilla wants to know, what is your advice regarding people over 60 going to the synagogue? Also, what about resuming playing cards, perhaps outdoors with masks? In other words, just trying to get back to some form of life.
Look, people over the age of 60 with comorbidities are a big problem. We don't want to affect them. We don't want them getting sick. The virus is still out there. Once again, we haven't beaten the virus. And we're very worried about the second surge. There were still over 2,400 cases in the last 24 hours. There's still a number of deaths. It's still happening. We do want people to start getting back to some social norms, but you've got to be very careful. Playing cards, you can't keep a distance of more than 1.5 meters from each other, even if you are playing outside.
And you're handing things to each other. That's it.
And you keep it, and you're going to be eating, and you're going to be drinking. So it's very difficult. Doing things outside, like seeing, let's say, friends outside, if you're all wearing your mask and you're all 1.5 meters outside and you're a very small group, that's reasonable. That's not unreasonable at this point in time. And I think we can manage that. I think that's okay. But you've got to do it within the boundaries and the framework of what we've been speaking about.
I must say that we did that yesterday. We sat on the driveway probably 4 or 5 meters apart. There was no shared food. It was just the opportunity to just sit and have a conversation outdoors, as I say, about maybe even more than 5 meters apart. And it really did make a big difference mentally, emotionally. I think it's important, provided you can do it in a way. And you've got to be strict, because it's so easy just to say, well, let me just run inside and get some popcorn. One has to be very disciplined.
Always about food.
Yes. Did you find that as well? All right. Well, at least I didn't make it about alcohol, but that is, Debbie says, my husband was diagnosed with bladder cancer during the lockdown and is now undergoing chemotherapy. We've got 3 older children, all living at home, and between us all, we've literally been at home for the last 5 months, not seeing any of our family or friends, as I live in fear of one of us getting COVID and passing it on to my husband. As life is returning to almost normal around us, what advice can Dr. Meyberg give us? Is it necessary for me to still be so neurotic?
So I think you've got to speak to your urologist and your oncologist and discuss what stage of cancer you're dealing with, what type of immune suppressant chemotherapy you are getting, where are they in the stage, what is their bloods like, etc. And they can help you understand if you can still remain neurotic, or which I don't think is neurotic. I think it's just being careful. I think you've got to be very careful to call yourself neurotic when you try.
I was going to say, I wouldn't pathologize that. Surely that sounds sensible.
I think what you've done is 100% correct. But there might be a time where your oncologist/urologist says it's actually okay now for your husband to be exposed to other people as long as they fulfill all the requirements. So just I think speak to them. You'll get a better idea where they're at.
Yeah, and get proper guidance there. Alan says, a point of interest, yesterday on my way to work in Sandton, I passed 6 groups of runners, 3 groups of walkers, no masks worn. I must be missing something, as the virus is still out there, and this is still in all its devastating glory. Now, what was interesting is Tanya responds to that message and says, I find it very hard to run with a mask. So I run at about 5:30 in the morning or 11 p.m., 11 at night, in order to avoid bumping into anyone, because I find it impossible to run with a mask. What's your thoughts about?
I think well done to Tanya, because she's not one of those people that are going to say, well, I can't run with a mask, I'm just going to run with everybody else. So what she's done is brilliant. I do think it's still extremely important, if you are running in a group, which is still not advisable, but if you are, run 1.5 meters apart from each other, and you have to wear masks. We have to keep ourselves covered, wear a mask or wear a buff. So it's still very important. It's selfish not to, because you're spreading the virus, especially with cyclists as well and with runners. It's very important.
What do you think about things like, I mean, we've spoken about gyms, I'm not going to go back into that, but a lot of people asking about extra murals for their kids, boxing, all of this type of thing.
Boxing is very high impact, and it's involved. It's very difficult to do boxing with a mask and with a coach, etc. I wouldn't advise boxing at this point in time, but I would advise that you could play, let's say, tennis. I mean, outside, as long as you've got a spray the whole time and you're wearing a mask and you spray your hands in between things. Tennis or table tennis, those things are okay as long as you keep on spraying. Things like volleyball, netball, and boxing, I wouldn't advise right now.
There's a Jewish custom that before the festival of Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, men go to the mikveh and immerse themselves. Leon wants to know, do you think it's still safe to do that this year, or should it rather be avoided? It is a place of overcrowding.
Yeah, I would avoid it because there's no way you can stop that interaction. I mean, you cannot stop that more than 1.5 meters between people. You need a lot. There's a lot of people going into one place, so I would avoid it.
So for this year, just
swimming pool.
Right, exactly. Ricky wants to know, as a teacher, how concerned should I be of getting the virus if a child needs attention or a hug after they fall, etc.? I can't give them what they need. It's my job. Are we especially at risk? It's so hard. This it is.
It's an emotional thing. It's not a rational thing, because it's emotional. You know rationally that you can't. There's no way that you should be giving a child a hug. Okay, because you don't know if you've got something or the child got something, you pass on it. So you just can't do it rationally, but emotionally you're between a rock and a hard place. So the answer is you shouldn't be hugging them, you shouldn't be picking up, and that's the whole risk of sending a young child back to school. You've got to set these parameters up in place before. And if you do have to, well, you've got to be careful. You've got to spray afterwards, you've got to wash, you've got to make sure everyone's wearing masks. And then once again, if it's a young child and they're not wearing a mask, they're not wearing a visor, then it complicates matters further.
Yeah, you're operating yourself.
They're going to have to quarantine afterwards.
Yeah. Stacey says, it's probably not even worth asking, but my son lives in Manchester in the United Kingdom. He booked in January to be here in December. I haven't seen him now for 1.5 years. He still has faith that he'll be able to come here. He is a South African British citizen, but resides there. Yes, my heart is broken. What is the opinion of international travel resuming?
Look, I think we're still in lockdown. We're still in a pandemic. We're waiting to hear from the government what's going to happen on the 15th of September, where we're going. So I think watch the space. Within the next month, we'll have an answer to that definitively from the government and from the actual virus statistics.
Yeah, and Stacey, just to tell you that I spoke to somebody that just returned from overseas. They went for their child's wedding, and the process was a very decent one. They've come back. They've gone into quarantine. I am a little bit hopeful that provided we continue the way in which we are behaving, and I think that's the critical thing, is that we're careful, and if we continue that, I'm sure that there is a chance that we'll be able to resume some form of travel in December. Michelle wanted to know about interprovincial travel. I just want to go to that question. She asks about traveling to see family in Bloem, for example. Is it safe to be able to go and see family? Obviously,
there's no difference at this point in time going to see family around the corner, seeing family in Bloem. Interprovincial travel is allowed right now. So you just got to be careful and fulfill every you've got to tick all the boxes, make sure you wear your mask, make sure you wash hands, social distancing. If you haven't seen your family for a long time, you're inclined to run up and want to hug them and kiss them, but you've got to avoid that.
Right. And Helen says the same question as we've been asked a lot of times, and it just seems so counterintuitive as to what the answer is. But my daughter's
we're desperate. We're all desperate.
From the virus.
We all want to be with our family.
She says her family's recovered from COVID. Yeah. but your view is just be as careful as possible. I want to get to Linton Lurie's question. He says, well done for the podcast. Although the Chief Rabbi's recommendation is for shul and minyanim to start in the open air, limited to maximum 15 people, I'm concerned, as I'm aware of schools that, for example, are having 30 people in a medium-sized hall. What is your view of greater numbers indoors, etc.?
Got to be very careful of greater numbers indoors. Outdoors is preferable for this type of thing. And once again, the rules have been set down by Professor Ephraim Kramer. They are extremely strict, they're extremely stringent, and they're there for a reason, because they work. And if we follow them, we can stop the spread in religious gatherings, which is the biggest area where it can spread. One other problem with having a large amount of people is not at the actual service, but when you leave the service, people tend to congregate together. And that's a big problem as well.
Yeah. And here's an anonymous question. Our helper who lives on our premises has been with us under lockdown since March and has hardly been out, with the exception of a few trips to the bank or pharmacy, as well as a recent scheduled visit to the Hillbrook Clinic for a checkup. On all these occasions, my wife took and fetched her. I note that lately she appears fairly depressed. She's very religious Christian and has made up her mind and is determined to go to church, which has recently opened. She'll apparently travel with a friend who is a driver by profession in his own car, and he will bring her back. A church apparently has a capacity of 8,000 people, has an upstairs and downstairs, but there'll be different intervals of services. I'm over 60 with multiple risk factors and have tried to specifically minimize any unnecessary external contact, both for myself and the people in my household. We have elected not to go back to synagogue. To date, my children have not returned to school and are doing online learning. Not that I really have much choice at this stage, but should I have instructed her not to go or persuaded her not to? If she does go, what is the additional care that she should be taken?
So yeah, that's a tough one, because you can't say it's okay for you to go to a synagogue, even though they're not going, and then you can't let your helper go to a church service. But you've got to understand what is happening at that church service. So yes, it's got a capacity for 8,000 people, but how many people are actually meeting together in one area? What are their social distancing cues? What are they doing? If you can find all of those things and get a better answer, then maybe we'll have a better idea of what you can do forward. I would be very nervous about it, especially because you've been so careful and you just don't know. And I would say that rather quarantine them than when they come back, because you're just looking for trouble.
But let's look at it this way. I mean, if I've got, as you can know, I've got balding as a comorbidity. Your advice to me so far is not to go to synagogue over the festivals.
It's not just because of your balding. Okay, there's more comorbidities we're talking about there. Okay.
Razor sharp wit is not a comorbidity. Never has been. Anyway, let's get back to that. But my family will be going to synagogue over the period, provided obviously it is safe.
Before you even go down that line, we know what's happening at the synagogues at the moment. We know how well structured it is. We know what they're doing and how they're doing it to prevent any issues. So if you know how the framework of it works, then you're happy with it. What I'm saying is, if you need to know how the framework of other sort of religious gatherings work, if they fulfill the same sort of criteria that we're fulfilling at the synagogues, then there's no issue at all. No issue at all.
Right. So you'd be comfortable, let's say in this case, for my family to go because they aren't bald, but for me not to. So there is a balance that we can achieve, provided we just
follow the rules. Just follow the rules.
Absolutely. I think that answers a lot of people's questions. And I know that this time is very, very confusing. In fact, probably more so than in other times when it's either complete lockdown or it's completely open. I think the advice is just look at your own circumstances, be careful, know that it's still out there, but try to have a little bit more of a life than we have had until now.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've got to just sum it up and say, the infections are down dramatically. People are, for the first time in months, actually happy and actually able to breathe a bit, okay? The weather is good. That helps as well. The new soccer season is about to start. I mean, that's just the best news of it all, okay? So I think we've got to end up and say, laughter is the best medicine, unless you are diabetic. Then insulin comes pretty high up on that list. So just be careful, look after yourself, follow the rules, don't tend to go off the lane that you've been on the whole time. Wear your masks, social distance, public distance, wash your hands. Just be careful and take care of each other.
Absolutely. Sound, sensible advice. I'm Howard Feldman. This is the Synthesis Sunday podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. That means you'll get alerts when these and all other interesting podcasts are available, and you won't miss any of them. Have a safe week. Have a good week. Be healthy, be happy, and be as good as you can be. I'm Howard Feldman. Have a great one.